All right. Well, Kyle Kulinski went on Pondering Politics and had a great interview where they brought up his time on Joe Rogan and his takes specifically on Joe Rogan and just where he fits in the right wing lexicon of everything and why he has so much influence on the normies. So I kind of wanted to just watch this interview because realistically, it is a great breakdown of why normal people aren't really shifting away from guys like Joe Rogan. So
what do you plan to do differently, if anything, over the next 2 years in terms of posture, in terms of collaboration, in terms of messaging, in terms of things you talk about? What are things that
and
you're
he got
thinking
himself
about?
one of them nice cameras.
Because I know the rest of us are thinking about this as well.
So one of the things that I've just sort of naturally started to do and I will keep doing is I am at war with fake independent media. I am at war with them because there was a lot of hope for this idea of new media originally, where everybody felt like, oh shit, here's a place where people are uncensored. Here's a place where people could tell the truth. Here's a place where people are not audience captured or captured by corporate interests. Like, this is different than your CNNs and your MSNBCs and your Fox Newses. This is different. But what's happened over time is independent media is fake, and it's just as bad, if not worse, than mainstream media. You saw this happen with the likes of the Joe Rogans and the Jimmy Dore types. Of course, the right wingers are horrific. Ben Shapiro is horrible. All those people are terrible. And it makes me want to ruthlessly and relentlessly go out there and try to correct the record and call out where they're fucking bullshit and call out where they're wrong, because we are surrounded by a tsunami of horse shit. And I'm just so fed up with it, because that is part of the reason why Trump won.
Republicans and Democrats are held to different standards. And in this political climate, Republicans can double, triple, quadruple down, and they get rewarded for it more often than not. And Democrats have to reinvent the wheel every election. Am I crazy, or what do you think?
No, you're right. And in fact, one of the things I've said in the wake of this election, and I said it to Piers Morgan's face, among other people, and they look at me like I'm crazy, is that Donald Trump is one of the most divisive and unhinged and arrogant candidates in my lifetime. And he won 2 out of 3 times and almost won 3 out of 3 times. The lesson should be Democrats genuinely need to be more arrogant and more unhinged and more aggressive. You have to make your case.
I don't agree with that, because they're going to be arrogant towards the wrong people. They're going to be arrogant towards the far left on that side.
On it. They don't budge an inch. If you disagree with Trump 1%, he's coming for your head, and he demands that you fall in line. And I would love to see the Democrats learn this lesson. You see people like Dean Phillips who've learned the opposite lesson. And he says, like, oh, we have to welcome MAGA into the tent and we have to be more kind. And it's like, no, you're misreading it completely. This is the guy who said he wants to deploy the military against us. Why all of a sudden would you genuflect at his altar? You need to be more aggressive. You know, I've said this, that in 2016, I understood the notion of like, hey, let's find areas where we could work with them and maybe get some good things done on the areas where we agree. Now I am not there at all. In fact, I want triple the resistance that we saw in 2016, because this party is completely and utterly unhinged. You have Trump. I mean, just look at his record the last time in office. Massively cut taxes for the wealthy and corporations, lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs, even though he campaigned as the anti-outsourcing guy, net loss of 2.9 million jobs his entire time in office, 3 million people lost health insurance under him. He appointed more Wall Street CEOs and billionaires than any administration in history. He filled the NLRB with union busters, destroyed the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, stiffed 8 million workers of overtime pay, and that's to say nothing of his horrible warmongering foreign policy. And I'm supposed to hold hands and sing Kumbaya or make the tent bigger or be kind to them? Are you kidding me? I want to be more unhinged. I want to be more arrogant. I want to make the case more aggressively than ever before.
Do you think that bridge is torched between you and Rogan? Because I haven't seen you on in a couple of years, and you were on multiple times.
Well, yeah. So a couple things. First of all, I'm a very introverted guy, contrary to popular belief. And whenever I have to go anywhere, my reaction is like, oh, I gotta go somewhere.
That's mine.
I'm one of those guys.
I'm one of those guys too.
I went on because it was a cool thing to do, and I did it 4 times or whatever the hell it was. But every time towards the end, it almost felt like a chore. Like, oh, I gotta go do this thing. God damn it. Yeah. So I really don't.
Although to be fair, once I'm out, then I'm kind of like, all right, I'm glad you got me out.
About getting on that platform. In terms of the bridge being burnt, don't know, don't really care, because what's happened to him is humiliating and it's pathetic. I mean, he's sort of a classic example of what happens when you do politics by vibes, when you don't do any homework whatsoever and know anything about the policies. And I think the reason I'm so hard on him is because he fucking knows better. He sat across the table from me when I was making not only left-wing arguments, but making anti-Trump arguments to his face. And he would nod along in agreement. And he would regurgitate similar arguments to other podcast guests. There's a famous clip of him ranting against the hardliners on immigration to Duncan Trussell. There's that famous compilation of him saying all these left-wing things. I want universal health care, and I want, free college, and I want this, and I want that higher wages. And then like for you to go from Bernie in 2016 or 2020, I think 2020, and then go to Donald Trump in 2024, I don't buy this idea of like, oh, we should all be the Joe Rogan whisperer and like be really nice to him to try to get him back to our side. No, fuck that. I was the guy who, before anybody else was even paying attention, I was holding his hand and walking him through it slowly and explaining it to him like he was a fucking child.
Come on,
and he would nod along in agreement.
Come on, buddy. Come on, don't be scared. Come on.
And then, when I'm gone, then Ben Shapiro comes on a couple weeks later and he nods along in agreement to Ben Shapiro. And Steven Crowder comes on and he nods along in agreement with Steven Crowder. And then this fucking asshole comes on and that fucking asshole comes on. So the bottom line is he's a contradictory character. And he'll vibe with mostly 95% of the time, he'll vibe with whoever he's sitting across from.
So on the notion of evolution, when we spoke last, you mentioned that perhaps a broader strategy could be coaching or couching progressive.
Actually, you know what? I'm going to stand up for Rogan on that one. The problem with that is the fact that he then takes that position and then uses it like that. Like he had just learned something so pivotal that he's like, yeah, no, this is my new position. And then he will hear another counterpoint and then be like, oh, never mind. This is my new position. That is the problem.
Policy.
He is like, yeah, he's the most impressionable man on the planet. It sucks because he doesn't actually take any hard stances.
Or populist policy in the veneer of centrism, right? So could you expound on that a bit more? Because again, when we first talked about it, I'm like, man, I just have an allergy. Anytime I hear centrist, I have such contempt for the word, as I'm sure you do. But hey,
that's funny. He's actually been like literally called the like centrist guy in this space. Maybe by so many different people.
It's good PR. Maybe it sells, and I'm certainly more open to it than I was. So can you make your pitch?
Yeah. I think you saw a version of this with Trump where one of the lines he would always go back to in his speeches, at his rallies and interviews is, we're in favor of common sense. We're just all about common sense. That's sort of his version of this thing of like, look, if you disagree with me, you're weird. You're the freak. You're wrong. And I really think the left does itself no favors by embracing the optics and the affect of radicalism. I very famously, even back in 2015 and 2016, I criticized Bernie for describing himself as a democratic socialist because the word socialist in the US is not viewed positively by the public. They don't like it. They don't like the word socialist.
I hate to say it, I probably had the same position.
And so why would you take your policy views and your positions, which are actually right in the mainstream of American opinion, and basically also label yourself something outside of the mainstream of public opinion? You're just asking it's a harder sell, right? And so this is something I've been harping away on for a while now, but in some ways, I really do think I am a centrist. I am a moderate. If you define centrist as right smack dab in the center of mainstream American opinion, I don't think anything that I'm talking about is out there is unpopular. Look at the polling on raising the minimum wage. Yeah. That always is very, very high. Look at the polling on universal health care. I mean, obviously, it depends on how you phrase it, but if you phrase it in a way that I think is relatively neutral and fair, the polls are through the roof on that. And so I think any sort of democratic policy platform that's a winner is going to include a lot of things which seem to be really forward-thinking and really progressive. But if you actually poll it, it's like 55% to 75% of people agree with it and would like it. So, yeah, I believe it now more than ever that you need to, because the message, if you say that, look, I'm a centrist, I'm the moderate, the message you're putting out there is the Republicans are the extremists. And they are. And they are. The things they believe, the things they're fighting for, it's ugly. And so why not also wrap yourself in this armor of, look, I'm with you, the average American, and I'm just a vessel for you and what you want. And so when we go out there and we say
Lord Duma, Crystal's got Kyle licking her shoes. Kyle is an embarrassment as a man and a pseudo-progressive.
things like,
I don't king shame. So.
yeah, I brought this up a lot recently. Democrats should be arguing on the campaign trail that we want the number one infrastructure in the world. Yes, Biden did an infrastructure bill. That's great. He deserves a lot of credit for that. Why aren't we thinking bigger? Trump has his Make America Great Again thing, and the right seems to like that. The left-wing version of that should be, we want to be number one in the world in infrastructure. We want high-speed rail everywhere. We want the best airports in the world, ending the corruption and getting clean elections, so publicly financed elections, universal health care, higher minimum wage, even something like 4-day work week, which polls tremendously popular. And in all the pilot studies, it's basically been proven that productivity stays the same or even goes up in some instances. Eliminating medical debt and Social Security for all, like a UBI check. Like, these are all things people would really like it. And you should couch it in the language of centrism and moderation so that everybody who's against it is sort of de facto labeled as, why are you being extreme? Why are you against the obvious positions?
All right. So he's actually way better with his messaging than, like, say, Cenk was, because Cenk was kind of what he was saying, where his messaging was almost too extreme when you would be talking about these like populist progressive agenda points.
President Biden was in many ways the least neoliberal Democratic president in decades. And her concern is, and this is Tom Hartman's concern too, that because Biden wasn't rewarded for it, this is going to send the wrong message to Democrats, that they're going to, like, you know what, fuck this. We're just going to tack more to the right, or we're just going to embrace more neoliberal policies because we tried a more progressive or more populist economic policy and we weren't rewarded for it. And this has to be transactional. If we give you a bit of what you want, you need to vote for us. So can you talk about that as well, and how it would relate to your messaging? Because it sounds like you would want more ambitious policy programs than what the Biden-Harris administration offered. But how would you, I guess, make it clear that, hey guys, if these politicians do it, you got to vote for them. You got to reward them. Otherwise, they're going to totally walk away from that.
Yeah. So like I actually said up front at the beginning of the conversation, I really do believe if the original Build Back Better bill got passed, I think Kamala would have won. And also, I think if the expansion of the social safety net that happened under COVID, if that was still in place, I really think the Democrats would have won. So in other words, I think that if you did address people's material conditions in such a strong way, that they would have been rewarded for it. But to your point, because you actually have a really good point, that some people are going to look at this and say, well, hold on, he broke from neoliberalism and he lost. So why wouldn't the takeaway be more neoliberalism? Well, there are a couple answers to it. One of them is a lot of the great policies that Biden did, they are genuinely long-term policies, right? So like the CHIPS Act, for example, phenomenal bill. It's going to be a while to get the full impact of that bill. The infrastructure projects, great thing. It's going to be a while to get all the benefits of that. And again, one of the just horror shows of all this is that Trump's going to take credit for a lot of these things that happen.
All of it.
And it's going to be infuriating. So that's part of the problem, is that it's long-term stuff. But there's another answer to your question here, and this one should be easier to address, but we live in hell, so maybe it won't be, which is, look, there is a genuine media problem here, right? There is a real media problem. And I remember it was a real slap in the face to me when I actually saw Biden doing some really good economic policies and seeing how everybody in independent media who pretended to be all about policy did not give credit where credit was due. I wanted to pull my hair out because, so for example, you had student debt reduction, which he fought in multiple different ways to get. You have the $1,400 stimulus checks that they sent out. You have, as we mentioned before, the pullout of Afghanistan, massively reducing the drone war. But they did project labor agreements for 200,000 construction workers, which raises their pay.
Lena Khan
alone is phenomenal. The Democrats also overturned a Supreme Court decision that would have stopped the EPA from regulating all carbon emissions. They slipped a provision into the IRA.
Didn't they do that? Yeah, with just clever writing in the IRA.
That's exactly right. Biden did a $15 minimum wage for federal contractors and employees, which impacts about 400,000 people. They did that gun reform, which closes the boyfriend loophole and funds red flag laws. You pointed out the NLRB, the PACT Act, which was healthcare for veterans exposed to toxic burn pits. They added 800,000 manufacturing jobs, and the CHIPS Act, and 15% corporate minimum tax rate, when before you had some corporations paying nothing or even getting a negative income tax, which is just a subsidy. You had $64 billion for Obamacare, and they banned junk scam temporary health insurance plans. They had the NLRB rule to increase unionization. We can go on and on here, but it was a real black pill moment for me.
Did they run on any of that?
When I saw Biden doing these things that are genuinely good economically, and you didn't see any real talk about it on CNN or MSNBC, which I don't know what you want to attribute that to. Maybe it's laziness, maybe it's ignorance, maybe these people are not real policy wonks and they're not following this stuff. You got the same both sides bullshit out of CNN and MSNBC. And then in so-called independent media, it was very clear to me at that point in time, oh, this is fake independent media because these people don't give a shit about policy. And so there's a real messaging problem where, you know, you need to get the truth out there. You have to spread the reality of the situation. And I think just think for a second, if the left had, you know, a media ecosystem that was at least comparable to that on the right, everybody would have been praising Chairman Biden when he got the CHIPS Act through and when he got the infrastructure bill through and we created 800,000 manufacturing jobs. You would never hear the fucking end of it. And then also, I don't want to let the politicians completely off the hook here, because Biden, as he got older, he was really unable to even make his own case. He would rather talk about AUKUS and NATO than go out there and say, I created 800,000 manufacturing jobs, Jack. And, you know, Kamala too. It's like, if Republicans never do anything good, but you bet your ass in the one instance out of 1,000 where they do something half decent, you're going to hear about it from now until the end of time. And we just don't have that messaging echo chamber on the Democratic side and and among the liberals and the leftists, and that's part of the problem.
What about as far as the candidate goes?
As far for 2028? Yeah, 2028.
Yeah.
Oh, I've said this everywhere I've been asked. Jon Stewart. I mean, I really think he sort of.
He's still on that?
On
no
policy,
shit.
He's great, but I think he's funny. He's charismatic. He's a celebrity.
It could work.
And he really represents the kind of vibe and swagger that I think we need in this moment in an era that is incredibly populist and incredibly angry.
Hey, people forget that Zelensky was literally like the Daily Show host in Ukraine. So
I think one of the reasons Trump won is people just genuinely like the show. They like the show. They like that the camera can't stay off him. They sort of think he's funny and he says things that are wacky. And I think Jon Stewart mirrors all of that minus the bad policies on our side. And so I think if you put Jon Stewart in a Democratic debate, I think it's a bloodbath. And by the way, to be clear, I think there's some really talented orators on the Democratic side. I think Gavin Newsom and Pete Buttigieg are the closest thing you're ever going to get to a gamer debate bro in the mainstream political space. They're both phenomenal in one-on-one interviews and one-on-one debates with Republicans.
Yeah, so I that was during the Trump administration. I remember it so well because Jon Stewart actually testified in front of Congress and he lit them the fuck up.
Yeah, Duke of Brett, Jon Stewart would win if he ran. Yeah.
One of the best improvised speeches in Congress, and it didn't come from a Congress person. It didn't come from a man, you know, reading off a teleprompter or speech. That was all extemporaneous speaking. And the PACT Act, which you mentioned earlier, you know, Jon Stewart was a major reason that got through because the people who are watching, that was a bipartisan piece of legislation, but bad faith Republican shitbags then pulled their support because they were pissed off at President Biden and Schumer. And Jon Stewart had to go on a shaming campaign. He went on Newsmax, bro. He was everywhere. Like, he was interviewed by anyone who would put a camera in front of his face, and he bullied the GOP into, you know, expanding healthcare for veterans. So he totally
literally
agree.
bullied that through. You're right. I forgot about that. He literally bullied through the PACT Act because they had voted it down. And then he was like, fuck this. So he was calling out Ted Cruz by name, going after all the Republicans who voted against it, literally humiliating them in front of the country. And they buckled. And like, this is exactly what we're talking about. This is the kind of politics that we need, where you can use the bully pulpit and shame the Republicans with the power of the horde. But you need somebody who actually is in touch with the horde, with the mob, with the people and what they want, and somebody who's willing to represent them come hell or high water. And I think that's what he represents.
But you did something that I'd only ever seen Luke Beasley do, which was you got Piers Morgan to agree with you, bro. So let's talk about that. What made you finally reconsider, and what was that experience like? And would you do it again? And why is the answer yes? Of course you would.
These guys really are the bro crowd. Hey, bro. All right, bro.
It's sort of the same thing I talked about before, that I'm usually so I would say I'm a very like schedule oriented guy. Like, even though my politics are progressive, I would say temperamentally I'm actually very conservative. I'm an introverted guy. I like the idea of having a schedule. I like the idea of doing the same thing every day. And with Piers, it always sort of works out that when his show is on is like when I'm usually recording my show or roughly in that time frame. And so it always felt like a
What's this
hassle,
have to do with
or
anything?
like I'd have to rush my show, or it would just sort of throw a wrench in the middle of my day. And the other thing is like, look, let's call a spade about that show. It's like it is built for conflict. It is not built for this platonic ideal of the marketplace of ideas where, let the truth rise to the top every time. It's like that is not what it's for. It's for people to yell at each other. It's for entertainment value. And it does feel in many respects kind of cheap. I know that you really need to be concise in that format, and you really need to get your point out quick. And, sometimes, the format I'm used to doing is just me ranting at the camera for 2 hours where I have all the space in the world to say whatever the hell I want to say. And so it just all felt like a little bit too much of a hassle. Didn't know if the juice was worth the squeeze. But eventually I said yes. I guess he just caught me in a good mood. And I actually got kind of lucky because the show was literally like the Democratic panel after the election, where he's asking like, well, what direction should the party go in and all that stuff. And so I literally had a panel of like 3 or 4 other people who were all sympathetic to my views or somewhat in alignment with my views. And so there was going to be no smoke in that area. So that just left Piers. And that's sort of yummy in my tummy because Piers is
he is good.
We all know his shtick, right? We all know his shtick. You literally
and Kyle's good at doing just like the thing that Piers needs to happen is calling him on his BS and just like doing like whenever Piers does that whataboutism crap, like, well, what about when they call him Hitler? They call him Hitler. Like I'm so glad that like he decimated him on those points.
Mentioned it earlier. It's like, I'm a centrist and I'm an old school liberal, but let me tell you why Donald Trump is right about everything. Like that's sort of his whole shtick. And so he messed up because he asked me a question, which I had been super prepared for. And I had been thinking about for like 2 weeks straight. This notion that like the reason Kamala lost is because she's too woke. It's like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. She didn't mention race. She didn't mention gender. She didn't say Latinx. There was nothing politically correct. There was no cancel culture. There was no conversation about trans people. There was nothing. There was nothing in that realm. She ran like Obama in 2008. Race was a non-issue. Nothing.
Well, no, according to them, it was all trans in sports like that. Apparently, according to Piers Morgan and his like that side of the right, that's the largest issue that was pushing the whole like Democratic Party away from winning the election. Was we were too focused on trans people in sports.
And so you asked me the thing about wokeness, and you're like, bro, you're walking right into my bear trap. I am so prepared to have this conversation, and you have nothing but your fucking fortune cookie or bumper sticker slogans that you've memorized and you regurgitate to a bunch of idiots. And so he just messed up by asking me a question that I was like super prepared for and I was really knowledgeable on because that argument was just driving me crazy. In the wake of the election, to have people blaming wokeness for her loss, it's like, this is nothing but an attempt to deflect and blame the left again. That's all that was. The wokeness was the problem. And so, at the end, he kind of agreed with me, but it's funny because like he just contradicted himself. He was like, I was like, hey, we should just tell the truth about Trump. How about that radical idea? And then he was like, yeah, but you guys, like, you don't even know how to do it. You need to do it with humor. And I was like, yeah, that's why I said Jon Stewart should be the nominee for 2028. And he's like, actually, you know what? You're right about that.
He did. He actually agreed with that. So I'd be interested to see it. Although it's kind of weird. Like I thought about that just in the context of like that we're putting a lot on Jon Stewart because if he doesn't want to like get involved, who are we to be like, but you need to, you're the voice, you're the one who can do this. But realistically, if he just wants to like sit at home with his family and just live a quiet life, that is for him to do. He's a successful comedian. He's done it his way. So, yeah, that'd be interesting to see though. Yeah, Kyle. All right. So I'm just reading the pseudo progressive comment about Kyle Kulinski. I wouldn't call him a pseudo-progressive. That's being a little too critical of his policies or his politics. Because honestly, he's like a leftist ally as much as you really can be. Hell, I mean, even Crystal to a degree, her politics don't really suck. I wouldn't put her in that vein. Occasionally she'll kind of surprise you with a more centrist take than we would be used to from her, but realistically, I really appreciate you guys checking out my content. If you guys could let me know in the comments below what you thought, that'd be much appreciated. Leave a like and sub to the channel if you haven't already. Either way, I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one.